For most truckers, the highway at night is a place of solitude, a stretch of pavement that feels timeless, endless. Mile after mile of nothing but the hum of the engine, the white lines disappearing beneath the truck's wheels. But for one driver, this routine trip would become anything but ordinary. It would take him down a road that stretched far beyond the physical and into something much darker. He was hauling a full load across state lines, a run he had made 100 times before. It was late, the kind of late where even the radio felt like a companion, crackling quietly with talk shows and old rock songs. The road was empty, the sky a starless black, and the world outside his window was just a blur of shadows. Everything was routine, until the call came through. It was dispatch. A voice, calm but urgent, came over the line, the kind of tone that grabs your attention. "Breaker, breaker, we've got a serious situation ahead. Danger up the road. You need to pull over now." The driver's brow furrowed. He hadn't heard of any issues on the route, and his truck's GPS showed clear roads. Still, something about the voice made him pause. It wasn't just the words. It was the way the warning seemed personal, like it was meant specifically for him. The driver picks up the mic, responding cautiously. "Dispatch, come again? What's the issue?" There was a brief silence, then the voice returned. "You don't have time. Pull over now. Something's coming, and if you don't stop, you won't make it." The urgency in the dispatcher's voice was undeniable. The driver's heart began to race, his instincts kicking in. But before he could respond, the transmission cut off. Static filled the airwaves. He slowed the truck, glancing around. Nothing but the thick fog swirling around him. The road a dark ribbon stretching into the unknown. The uneasy feeling gnawed at him. He had been on the road long enough to know when something wasn't right. Still, something about that voice tugged at the back of his mind. A strange familiarity. He decided to pull over, just to be safe. He waited. A minute passed, then another. Nothing. No other vehicles, no signs of trouble, just the quiet hum of his idling engine. He shook his head, chalking it up to a mistake. Dispatch had to have gotten it wrong. Maybe there was confusion on the channel. But just as he was about to shift back into gear, the radio crackled again. "Good. You listened. You're safe for now." The driver's heart skipped a beat. There was something strange about the voice, something he hadn't noticed before. It was familiar, but not in the way he had first thought. He picked up the mic again. "Who is this? What's going on?" There was no response, just static. He waited, his pulse pounding in his ears, and then something clicked. He knew that voice. It wasn't just familiar, it was impossible. The voice belonged to someone he hadn't heard in years, someone who, as far as he knew, wasn't even alive anymore. It was a dispatcher he used to work with, years ago. The man had been a veteran of the job, calm, reliable. But one night, on a routine drive like this one, the dispatcher's life was cut tragically short. A heart attack had taken him while on shift. There was no way it could be him. No way. The driver's blood ran cold. It didn't make sense, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the voice he had heard, the warning, it was real, and whoever, or whatever, had sent it, had saved his life. He sat there, paralyzed with uncertainty, when suddenly, through the mist, he saw it. Up ahead, just barely visible in the swirling fog, something massive was blocking the road. A wreck, an overturned tanker, jackknifed across both lanes. The twisted metal gleamed in the headlights, shattered glass glittering like ice. If he hadn't stopped when he did, he would have plowed straight into it. The crash wasn't recent. The twisted wreck looked like it had been there for hours, maybe even longer. No emergency lights, no warning signs, just silent destruction, hidden in the fog, waiting. He couldn't believe it. The dispatcher's warning had been real. But how? Shaken, he picked up the mic and called into dispatch. This time another voice answered, one he recognized as the current dispatcher. She sounded confused, calm. No reports of accidents on his route, no warnings sent out, nothing. The driver's heart raced as he described the wreck. And then he asked the question that had been eating at him since the moment the first call came through. Who was on the line before? Who gave me the warning? There was a pause on the other end, a long one. When the dispatcher finally spoke again, her voice was filled with confusion. And something else. A nervous tremor. We haven't had any other dispatchers on duty tonight. It's just been me. The driver's grip on the mic tightened. His mind spun, trying to make sense of it all. There was no way he imagined it. The voice had been real. The warning had been real. But the person who gave it wasn't. The dispatcher who had saved his life had been dead for years. He never spoke of it again, but every time he drove that stretch of highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was still watching. Still guiding. And as he drove off into the darkness, one question lingered. How long will they keep watching? And who will be saved next? This is the story of one trucker, a long-haul journey, and a cargo that wasn't what it seemed. It started like any other night. He had picked up a routine shipment, standard cargo, nothing out of the ordinary. The paperwork said it was construction materials, heavy, but not unusual. The load was strapped down tight, the trailer sealed. He had made these kinds of runs 1,000 times before. But this night would be different. The first few hours were uneventful, just the open road, the distant hum of the engine, and the comforting monotony of the drive. But as the hours ticked by and the night deepened, something changed. A sound. Faint at first, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. It came from the back of the truck. It was a low, almost imperceptible noise, like a creak or a groan. At first, he ignored it. Trucks make noise. They're big, heavy machines. But the longer he drove, the louder it got. He turned down the radio, trying to focus. There it was again. A groan, followed by something else. Something that sounded like a scream. His pulse quickened. He glanced in the mirrors, expecting to see something, anything, but the road behind him was empty. Just a long stretch of asphalt, illuminated by the faint glow of his taillights. Nothing unusual. But the sound, it persisted, growing louder, clearer, like someone or something was trapped inside the trailer. The driver flicks on the CB radio, his voice tense as he calls into dispatch. Dispatch, this is 9-9. I'm hearing some strange noises coming from the trailer. Could it be something wrong with the load? Dispatch responded calmly as they always did. A professional voice, reassuring him that it was probably nothing. Cargo sometimes shifted, especially on rough roads. But the driver couldn't shake the feeling that this was different. And then, just as he was about to let it go, the sound changed again. This time, there was no mistaking it. It wasn't just a groan or a creak. It was a full, blood-curdling scream. He slammed on the brakes, pulling the truck off to the side of the road. The tires screeched against the asphalt, the massive vehicle shuddering as it came to a stop. The screaming stopped, just as suddenly as it had started. Silence fell, thick and oppressive. For a moment, he just sat there, his heart pounding in his chest, his hand hovering over the door handle. Whatever was making that noise, it was inside his trailer. His boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the trailer. The beam of his flashlight cut through the fog that had rolled in, illuminating the heavy sealed doors of the container. Everything seemed normal, but his gut told him otherwise. With a trembling hand, he reached for the latch. He hesitated. The paperwork said this was just ordinary freight, just supplies for a construction site. But what if it wasn't? Inside, nothing. Just crates and pallets, all neatly secured. No signs of movement, no signs of anything unusual. The driver stood there, his breath visible in the cold air, his heart racing. But then, there it was again. It wasn't the scream this time. It was a low, guttural moan, like something alive, something suffering. His flashlight flickered, casting long, eerie shadows across the cargo. He stepped inside, his boots echoing on the metal floor as he moved toward the source of the sound. And then, just as he was about to reach the back, everything went silent. He stood there, frozen, waiting for the noise to return. But there was nothing. Just the low hum of the truck's engine and the distant rustle of wind outside. He shone the light across the crates, searching for any sign of what could be making the noise. But there was nothing out of place. Just ordinary cargo. Ordinary, right? He convinced himself it was all in his head. The long hours on the road, the isolation, the dark. Maybe he was just hearing things. Maybe the wind had caught the trailer at the right angle, making it sound like something it wasn't. He turned the key, the engine roared back to life, and he pulled back onto the highway. But the further he drove, the louder it got. It was no longer just one scream. It was multiple, like there were dozens of voices, all crying out at once. The driver's hands shook as he gripped the wheel, his heart racing. He checked the mirrors again, half expecting to see something moving in the back. But the road behind him was empty. No other cars, no lights, just the endless screaming void inside the trailer. He knew he couldn't stop again. Whatever was in that trailer, he couldn't face it. Not again. He kept driving, the screams growing louder, more frantic, as if whatever was inside was getting closer, closer to breaking free. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence was deafening. He drove for hours, never daring to check the trailer again. When he finally reached his destination, the yard was empty, and the night air was still. He climbed out of the cab, his legs shaky, and walked to the back of the trailer, his heart pounding in his chest. With trembling hands, he opened the doors one last time. The cargo was exactly as it had been loaded. No signs of anything unusual, no signs of the source of those screams. The paperwork was correct, just ordinary freight. But the driver knew what he had heard. He wasn't alone on that road. He delivered the load, but the sounds of that night would haunt him forever. What he heard wasn't in the cargo. It was something else, something that can't be explained. And to this day, no one knows what truly rides in the back of those trailers when the night falls and the highway grows quiet. Some things are better left sealed. If you like the stories so far, please support us. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell icon. Now back to our final story. For truckers, the highway is their life. But for one man, it became the scene of a mystery that would haunt him forever. He had been driving for hours, pushing through the fatigue, the monotony, the endless stretch of asphalt that seemed to go on forever. His logbook was full, the clock ticking toward his next mandated rest stop. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, rest stops were hard to come by. It was time to pull over, whether he wanted to or not. He needed fuel, food, and a break. That's when he saw it, a diner. It appeared out of nowhere, a lone beacon in the night, almost too perfect. A cozy diner at the edge of the highway, bathed in the soft, warm glow of neon lights. He couldn't remember seeing it on the map. But out here, things didn't always match up. He shrugged it off and pulled in. There was something off about the place. Not in a bad way, but just different. The air was thick, still, and the diner's lights seemed to hum in the quiet night, the kind of quiet that crawls under your skin. Inside, it was like stepping into another time. The decor was straight out of the past, untouched by the years. It was almost charming. If it weren't for the feeling that something just didn't fit, like everything was too perfect. The trucker took a seat at the counter. The waitress, a young woman with a bright, welcoming smile, poured him a cup of coffee before he even had a chance to ask. The menu was classic diner fare. Burgers, pie, milkshakes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But it all felt surreal. Everything seemed normal, ordinary. But there was something about the way she spoke, the way the other patrons glanced at him, almost like they were watching him, waiting for something. He shook it off. Maybe it was the exhaustion catching up with him. Long hours on the road can play tricks on the mind. He left the diner, the wind howling a little harder now, as if warning him to stay. He climbed back into his rig, checked his fuel gauge. Full. The strange unease from before crept back into his chest, but there was no reason to linger. As the miles ticked by, the trucker couldn't shake the feeling that something about the place was wrong. But he was too tired to dwell on it, his eyes growing heavy. And soon, the diner was nothing but a memory, disappearing into the night like a mirage. The next morning, he stopped at a small town off the highway. He couldn't get the diner out of his head. The people, the strange stillness. It nagged at him, so he asked the local cashier about it. The cashier looked at him with a puzzled expression. "What diner?" she asked. He described it. The neon sign, the red booths, the jukebox playing old tunes. She shook her head. "There hasn't been a diner on that stretch of road for years." He couldn't believe it. He had just been there. Hadn't he? The coffee, the food, the friendly waitress. It was all real. It had to be real. But the cashier was insistent. The diner he described had burned down, over a decade ago. The trucker drove back down that same stretch of road, his heart pounding, eyes scanning for any sign of the diner. But there was nothing. No glowing neon, no red booths, no familiar faces. Just an overgrown lot and the crumbling remains of a foundation. Had it been a dream? A trick of the mind? Or something else entirely? To this day, he doesn't know. All he has are memories of a diner that shouldn't exist, and the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone on that road after all. Somewhere, on a forgotten stretch of highway, the diner at the end of the road still waits for weary travelers, if they dare stop. Thank you for watching. See you on our next video.